LSU-Bama is a night game in Death Valley, and Lane Kiffin is so sad about it. Dork.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked On LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And if you're on YouTube, smash that like button. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Had a chance to visit with Peter Burns of the SEC Network. Always enjoy our visits with PB. So we're going to get into that. He did give us his take on the LSU loss at A&M, his thoughts on Bama's bounce back against Missouri, and an early thought on LSU-Bama. By the way, speaking of which, early line is open for LSU-Bama. The Tigers are a slight favorite at home over the Tide. We're going to get to that here in just a minute. But Monday, the SEC announced their TV windows for the TV assignments, I should say, for next Saturday. Of course, it'll be a big weekend around college football. And once you get to November, that's always technically the case, or typically the case, I should say. So for Saturday, November the 9th, there are two real marquee games in the Southeastern Conference. There is, of course, LSU, Alabama. And the other is Ole Miss hosting Georgia. Well, the league announced it'll be a day-night doubleheader on ABC, and Ole Miss, Georgia will be at 2:30, and then LSU-Bama will get the night slot at 6:30. Comes as no surprise here in Baton Rouge because LSU-Bama has been at night effectively every year since Nick Saban's been in Tuscaloosa. 2007 was a day game. 2008 was a day game. 9 was a day game. And 10 was a day game. But starting with the game of the century in 2011, CBS put it in that primetime slot. And it's been there basically every year since, except the 2019 game. Because if I remember correctly, CBS chose Bama, Georgia that year, if I'm not mistaken, for the primetime game. Or no, forgive me. It wasn't Bama, Georgia. It was Georgia, Notre Dame early in the season. Georgia hosted Notre Dame, and that was the CBS primetime game early in the season, an early non-conference game. But in any event, LSU beat Bama at 2:30 in the afternoon in Tuscaloosa in 2019. But every other year, it's been a night game, and it should be. It's routinely one of the best games in college football, one of the highest rated games in college football. And if you're a TV network trying to put the best games on in primetime, that's exactly what you're going to do. But Lane Kiffin didn't like that at all, did he? Lane Kiffin at his Monday press conference, he was asked by a member of the media about playing during the day and if he had a preference playing day or night, if playing at night was an advantage. And Lane Kiffin took the opportunity to get out the tissues, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's proven over time in NFL and college. Playing at night in electric atmospheres is a home field advantage, and tough when you got to do that as a opposing team. So that's been proven for a long time. And so who won at night? LSU gets to play at night again, I guess. Shocker. So that's 2 for 2 for them. It is an advantage. I feel bad for our fans, not have one night conference game is really unfortunate for them. And so whatever. It's just really disappointing, but it is what it is.
Oh, I feel so bad for the fans. So disappointing for them. Hey, Lane, by the way, LSU just had to go play Texas A&M in College Station in front of 108,000 people at night that were going bat bleep crazy and all wearing black. Cry me a friggin' river. Here's an idea, Lane. Why don't we take a look at the most watched games of the college football season so far. If you look at the top 25 most watched games of the college football season so far, Georgia has played in 4 of them. Bama, LSU, Oklahoma, Southern Cal have played in 3. Ole Miss has played in 1. Care to guess what that one game is that Ole Miss played in that's among the top 25 most watched games of the college football season so far? Do you, Lane? Would you like to guess what game that is and where that game was played and what time it was played? Yeah, it was at LSU at night. Why? Because people who watch college football want to watch Tiger Stadium at night in big games and big environments. Is it an advantage for LSU? Absolutely it is. You saw it firsthand when you came to Baton Rouge and you grabbed the throat. When you went for it on a 4th and 1 after getting the ball at the LSU 13 and you got no points. When your kicker missed a 32-yard field goal. When your all-everything wide receiver dropped an 81-yard walk-in touchdown. And ultimately, your defensive back fell down and got mossed by Kyron Lacey in overtime. You lost in a night game in Death Valley because it's hard to play a night game in Death Valley, and that's what people want to see. Lane, here's an idea. How about you schedule better than a 68th strength of schedule? Here's the bottom line, Lane. Ole Miss is a runt. You've always been a runt. You're always going to be a runt in your little overgrown high school stadium. You haven't won an SEC championship since 1963. You haven't been to the SEC championship game since 08. You've never been to the SEC championship game. You know who's been to multiple SEC championship games? Missouri. You know who's been to an SEC championship game? South Carolina. You know who's been to 2 SEC championship games? Arkansas. Oh, you know who's been to an SEC championship game? Mississippi State. You know who's never, ever, 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 never, ever, ever been to the SEC championship game? Vanderbilt and Ole Miss. You're a runt, accept your lot in life. You're a runt. You'll always be a runt, and you're never going to get priority in scheduling over a night game in Tiger Stadium. How about this, Lane? Don't lose at home to Kentucky, Lane. Or, Lane, how about you beat LSU? If you do either of those things, you probably do get the night game because then it's a top 5 matchup with Georgia and Ole Miss. And you know what? The TV networks would probably like to see that. And oh, isn't this all about TV? Because the SEC signed a 10-year, $3 billion contract with ESPN and ABC, a contract from which you and your program and every program in the SEC benefits handsomely. So shut up and play the games when they tell you to play the games. Look, you want to go in front of cameras and microphones and whine and complain and moan and pander to your fan base? Fine. You want to play meaningful night games at home? Here's how you do it. Win something of significance, and then you'll get night games at home. As it is, you're still a runt. Losing to Kentucky, losing as a favorite in Baton Rouge when you had a double-digit lead. Win something of significance, and then maybe you'll have a little clout to be able to ask for night games at Vaught Hemingway Stadium. As it is, enjoy getting your behind kicked during the day in front of your home crowd that you're so disappointed for when Georgia comes in 2 weeks. It's Locked On LSU, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Roy. Hey, LSU fans, it's time to recognize our Roy Player of the Week so far this season. We pulled over $20,000 to support players on Roy. They're micro deposits, which lead to massive change. With the Roy app, you can direct your support, to the athletes that you love, ensuring all funds go to the specific player you choose. This is really cool. So unlike a collective, you know exactly where your support is going, and you even receive exclusive content like personal videos, updates after the season, and the best part, it's risk-free. I love this part. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. This week, look, it's hard to pick a Roy Player of the Week from LSU after the way the game went and certainly the way the game ended. But how about Aaron Anderson? I just pitched in $100, and I'd love for you to join me. Even $10 makes a difference. Let's show Aaron Anderson the love. Keep him connected to LSU. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets your team up for success. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. You can win 2 tickets to a game in November. Just download Roy, create an account, enter the referral code Locked On, and you're entered. It's that simple. If you're already on Roy, any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Download Roy now and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. And be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return_on_you. That's at Roy_return_on_you. Roy, support the players, change the game. So we got the early line for LSU and Alabama a week from Saturday in Tiger Stadium. And look, we're not going to spend an inordinate amount of time already breaking down LSU-Bama. Okay, we've got 2 weeks to get into this game. And so we're going to talk about a lot of different angles, but I don't want to start like going too deep into the breakdowns. But Vegas has LSU, or odds makers have LSU as an early 1.5 point favorite against the Tide in Baton Rouge. For what it's worth this year, if you're just looking at point spreads and record against the spread, while both LSU and Bama are 6-2, Bama is 4-4 against the spread. LSU is 3-5 against the spread. Here's the difference. LSU started the season 0-4 against the spread. Obviously, they lost outright to USC, and then they failed to cover against Nicholls and South Carolina and UCLA. So they started 0-4 against the spread, but since then, they've gone 3-1 against the spread. Their first loss of the last 4 games was, of course, the game against Texas A&M this past weekend, which was a virtual pick. A&M was about a point and a half favorite. And we know LSU had the game seemingly well in hand midway through the third quarter. Marcel Reed comes into the game, and then Nuss started throwing picks, and it all unraveled. But effectively, LSU over the last month has been playing much better than Alabama. Over the last 4 games, LSU 3-1 against the spread, Alabama 1-3 against the spread in their last 4. So, of course, that includes losses to Vanderbilt and Tennessee. And then their lone win against the spread was this past weekend against, I should mention the South Carolina game they failed to cover. And the lone win against the spread was this past weekend with their lopsided 34-0 win over Missouri. So they've been going in different directions. LSU had covered 3 straight, then failed to cover this past weekend. Bama had failed to cover 3 straight and then did cover this past weekend. But LSU has been the better team over the last month than Alabama. That's not even really debatable. And what's so interesting as we look at this game, and you may wonder, how can an LSU team that has struggled to run the ball and at times has really struggled defensively, like we saw, especially against Marcel Reed and a running quarterback, then here comes Jalen Milroe, maybe the ultimate running quarterback in college football. Obviously, there's the value of the venue and playing a night game in Tiger Stadium. But the other part of it is Alabama's defense just hasn't been great this year. And I think LSU is sort of positioned with what they do well to be able to exploit the Alabama defense. So, for example, Bama in total defense is 44th. They're 20th in the country in scoring defense, 34th against the pass, and 68th against the rush. Now, for what it's worth, I told you their scoring defense, that's really what matters. How many points a game do you give up? They're 20th in the country at 18 points per game. But in conference games, that number jumps to 24.6. So even that, and that includes, by the way, the shutout of Missouri this past weekend when you faced a hobbled Brady Cook and then Drew Pine, when you literally shut out Missouri, and it was the first time Missouri had been shut out in almost 60 games. So that did clearly alter the averages a smidge there. But even still, when you look at Alabama, they've been a shell of the team in conference games that they were in the non-conference when when they cruised against Western. They shut out Western Kentucky in their opener. They allowed 16 points to South Florida. They allowed just 10 at Wisconsin. But then when you look at conference games, they allowed 34 to Georgia, 40 to Vanderbilt, 25 to South Carolina, 24 to Tennessee before shutting out Missouri this past weekend and kind of getting their averages a little bit back on track. But even still, it's been a much bigger challenge, clearly, in conference play than it was in the non-conference for Alabama. And while they're 34th against the pass, like we mentioned on the previous show, Bama is 68th in the country against the run. This will be the weakest run defense that LSU will have played up until this point in the season when they take on Alabama. So, I mean, you've faced 4 rush defenses already in the top 18 in the country, including the number 1 rush defense in America in Ole Miss. So LSU's inability to run the ball has been a large part LSU's poor play, but also the fact that you face some very good run defenses and you haven't fared well against them. Alabama is statistically the worst rushing defense you would have faced up to this point in the season. So it stands to reason Bama's given up plays through the air. LSU is one of the best passing offenses in the country. Garrett Nussmeier second only to Jackson Dart in passing yards in the conference. And then this is an Alabama defense that has struggled against the run. So the thought being LSU at home should be able to move the ball against Alabama. And maybe with 2 weeks to prepare, we could see LSU actually have a plan to stop the running quarterback, which they clearly didn't have when Marcel Reed entered the game this past Saturday, and that cost LSU its mulligan. So LSU, an early 1.5-point favorite over Alabama. We'll see as the money starts to come in on that game how that line might move between now and a week from Saturday. But early returns looking good for the Tigers, an opportunity to go get healthy, get ready. Brian Kelly, as we detailed after that first open date, very good when his team has extra rest. But again, much more to talk about as we get closer to the game a week from Saturday. Had a chance to visit with Peter Burns of the SEC Network. Not only his reaction to LSU, Texas A&M, his reaction to Alabama's get right against Missouri, and an early thought on LSU, Alabama a week from Saturday. We'll get to that with Peter Burns to wrap up Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to take action. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Take a look at the odds. We just talked about LSU-Bama. Tigers an early 1.5 favorite over the Crimson Tide. Get in on the action if you think that might flip a little bit or if the line might go up. As they always say, chalk early, dogs late. So get on the Tigers early if you want to. And, of course, maybe you're a Saints fan as well. Saints might actually have a chance to win a game this weekend. They go up to Carolina to take on the Panthers, an only 5.5-point favorite over Carolina. We'll see if that line might move as well. Speaks to how bad Carolina is if the Saints are a 5.5-point favorite. But you know where to play. It's over at FanDuel. Get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com. Love when I have the opportunity to visit my buddy Peter Burns of the SEC Network. Of course, a Port Allen native who now does great work with the SEC Network and ESPN. And love when I have the opportunity to visit with PB. And we talked about a handful of things, all involving LSU. And I wanted to get his reaction first and foremost to LSU going to College Station and taking it on the chin, crumbling the way they did late.
I had already gone through the mental exercise that they were going to lose one of the three, right? So they lost the one, and that's where I was worried a little bit about the Arkansas game, and they did that with flying colors. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I was more worried in the fact that, like, you're up 17-7 and you just make that one bad mistake, and you're just like, oh my God, it just. It's like you're under par and you're 2 under and you're like, man, just don't hit it left. Don't hit it left. You're like, screw it. I think I'm going to hit the driver here. You're like, no. All you got to hit is iron. Like, you can lay up. You're fine. Yeah. Nah, screw it. I'm going to hit the driver. And sure enough, you hit one out of bounds and the whole round goes to hell. And that's basically what I felt like happened. You got that crowd into it, and now nothing's changed other than the fact that you just have to win out if you want to be a college football playoff team.
But that is something that's changed. You can't say nothing's changed other than you have to win out, because that is something that has changed. But as far as on the field, I can kind of understand if you feel that way about LSU coming out of that game. I don't know that we learned anything about LSU. You struggle to run the ball against a good defensive front. Garrett Nussmeier needs to be effectively perfect, and if he's not, it's going to be really hard to win. And defensively, LSU's issues against the run at times this year have reared their head. The really unfortunate part is, and I think my buddy T-Bob, who I do a post-game show with, I heard him say this, and it's kind of true. You were almost too good defensively. As weird of a contradiction as that may sound, if you weren't so dominant defensively through the first 37 minutes of the game, Connor Wegman stays in and you probably win. But because you were so overwhelming and so dominant defensively with the plan that you had cooked up all week for Connor Wegman, Mike Elko made the change, put Marcel Reed in, and that's ultimately what changed the game. Now, I also asked Peter for his thoughts on Bama, Missouri, after Bama had really struggled for 3 weeks. They lost to Vanderbilt. They were very shaky against South Carolina, and then they lost to Tennessee. Well, they go get a home game against Missouri, and it was a get-right spot. No Brady Cook. Brady Cook started but exited. It was Drew Pine, and Missouri had nothing offensively in this ballgame as Bama shut him out 34-0. And I asked PB for his take on that.
But I think that was more of just Missouri not having Brady Cook and then Alabama being desperate, right? I mean, like, for them to be at home to take care of a team that had been underperforming all year long and then had to go with their backup quarterback who was just non-existent, I just felt like that was what they should do, right? Like, if LSU played that Missouri team, I'm not quite sure how different the final score would have been. So I don't look at it going, oh, my gosh, they've got these superpowers, you know? I mean, I look at it more of like their back was up against the wall. They answered. Now I expect LSU to have to do the same thing against Bama here in a week and a half.
And they'll have the opportunity to do it at home, just like Alabama did. Although the challenge of LSU's defense stopping Alabama's offense with Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard and some of those skill guys is far greater than the challenge Alabama had at home trying to stop Missouri without its quarterback. But we'll get to that. And the one other thing that I wanted to let you hear from Peter as we kind of looked ahead a smidge to LSU Alabama, you know, I asked Peter about about his thoughts with respect to the running game and the running quarterback and how that may look, given what happened against Texas A&M and how that may project to the Alabama game.
And the thing that upset me the most, that does wear me out a little bit, is the fact that Alabama decided that they were just going to run the ball. Like that's what they were going to do. And did they find something concerns me, because I look at just that there's that one moment that the camera shot shows Blake Baker and Brian Kelly talking to each other like, I ain't got a clue. You got a clue how to fix this? I don't know. How about you? I'm like, now it felt like $15 million of people looking at each other like, bro, I forgot that they had another quarterback we forgot to prepare for, which I don't know necessarily that's 100% the case. I mean, I heard the Greg Payne comments, but it was clear that they could not make an adjustment, and that to me was troubling that they couldn't find something. Now, to the same point, Marcel Reed played like a champ. I mean, he couldn't have been any more efficient at what he did. I was just surprised that there wasn't a little bit of a better game plan after the first, 2 drives where they just crushed them.
Yeah, PB, when LSU scored to make it 28-23, you're thinking, all right, 9 minutes to go in the game. You got it back to a score. You let your defense go sit and watch for a minute. You put together like a 9-play drive. They made some adjustments. Yeah. Come out and get a stop. Get the ball back and go take the lead back and win the game, right? And just get the hell out of there.
Yeah.
And then, boom, 54 yards down the seam. They're in the end zone 3 plays later. Game was over at that point.
And a credit to them. I mean, a credit to Colin Klein and Elko, because they have pressed the right buttons at the right time. They did the same exact thing on the flip side as they went with Connor Wigman against Missouri. Missouri was caught flat-footed. They had been ready for Marcel Reed. They didn't understand that Wigman was going to come in there and pass it. They weren't ready. And frankly, they took advantage of that crowd momentum change when Nuss threw the bad ball.
Yeah.
And we were caught, flat-footed.
It's a great point about the Missouri game. And that was Connor Wigman's most efficient game by a mile of his career. But leading up to that game, everyone was anticipating Marcel Reed, who had started the previous 3 and had gone 3-0, was going to start that game against Missouri. So when Connor Wigman started, it was a bit of a surprise to everyone and probably a bit of a surprise to Missouri as well. Maybe they caught him a little off guard. What I will say is, while LSU struggled against Marcel Reed the week before, they dominated Arkansas with a very similar attack with Taylor Green and Jaquindon Jackson, or a dynamic running quarterback and a very powerful back. But they prepared for it all week. It was very clear LSU did not prepare for Marcel Reed. I mean, Greg Penn said it, and it was very obvious just watching the game. So now with 2 weeks to prepare for Jalen Milroe, can you fare better? And it's worth pointing out with Milroe running the ball. The opener against Western Kentucky, he ran 10 times for 79 yards with a long of 40. By the way, that long of 40 against Western Kentucky in week 1 is the longest run Jalen Milroe has had all season. He had a 36-yarder against Georgia. But after that Georgia game, where he ran 16 times for 117 yards and 2 scores, it's like every team has just decided, we're not going to let you beat us running the football. You're going to have to throw it. He ran 7 times for 10 yards against Vandy, 18 for 36 against South Carolina, 14 for 11 against Tennessee, and this week against Missouri, 11 for 50. But by the way, he had a long of 32. So outside of the 32-yarder, he ran 10 times for 18 yards. Effectively, everyone after the Georgia game said, we're not letting you beat us running the football. You're going to have to throw it. And he's just incapable of doing that consistently. So I would assume that's going to be LSU's same approach. How effective can they be? It was a miserable effort against Jalen Milroe a year ago for LSU defensively. But then again, everything was a miserable effort for LSU defensively a year ago. Milroe last year against LSU, 20 rushes for 155 yards and 4 touchdowns. Again, it wasn't his arm that beat you a year ago. It was his legs. Can't let it happen again. Got 2 weeks to prepare for it. See how they do. Okay, that'll do it for us here on today's episode of Locked on LSU. Thanks for making us your first listen. Now for your second listen, how about go check out Locked on SEC with my guy Chris Gordy, LSU alum. You can find Locked on SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hey, if you are on podcasts, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.